Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest ThingCast, part two of our discussion with Chuck Pfarrer and John Higgins, the creators of Dark Horses, the Thing from Another World comic. John can actually hear us today, which is great. Thank you for joining us, John, and thank you for coming back, Chuck. And just real quick, as always, please feel free to take screenshots of this conversation and post, tag us. We are at The Thing Expanded on Facebook and then at Thing Expanded on Twitter/X and Instagram. Yes, so let's get started. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it was just so frustrating not to be with you guys on the weekend. I mean, as I said earlier, so like I tidied up my studio for the first time in about 10 years. So the fact that you can't see any beer bottles and fast food cartons around is thanks to you guys. So great to be back.
Right, and as you have some of the illustrations behind you. Are those the original print, the original ones you did?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so much fun. Sort of like the the two issue series that Chuck and I did, sort of like had a finite, obviously beginning, a middle, and an end, which was just a great way of sort of like producing something with a collaborator as talented as Chuck. But I was actually asked to carry on doing the covers in particular for sort of like the follow up stories, and these are a couple of covers from that particular period, and it was just so much fun to sort of like carry on doing monsters. I mean, more or less, Chuck was there to help me create monsters, and all my career has been spent creating monsters. So thank you so much, Chuck.
John, it was such a pleasure to work with you. And every now and then, I mean, in this business, it's sort of crazy. There's a lot of ego. There's a lot of my idea is best and everything else. But working with John was the absolute antidote because we worked together so well. We got the best out of each other. And John, it was an absolute pleasure. It just, we had a great time too. It was a lot of fun.
We did. I mean, it's one of those things. The thing that enjoy most about doing comics, and the great thing for me working, literally the first years of my career with Chuck. I mean, he spoiled me in a way because he's such a good writer, and not only is such an intelligent writer, the stories are great, but he actually makes the artist's job so much easier. He doesn't do, fluff. He actually gets down to the business. He actually tells you the story the way it should be. And it was just so much pleasure to actually deal with someone not only who is a very talented writer with great ideas, but also he actually gives the artist exactly what he requires and nothing else. And that was a great thing about working with Chuck. So talented.
Now, John, we should, get your background. But when did you first see the thing, and what was your response to then being given the chance to create art based on the thing?
I was blown away. It's like, it was one of my favorite, right from the very beginning. It's like, it is in my top 10 favorite movies, science fiction movies of all time. Actually, the top three, Blade Runner, Alien, and The Thing really are my top three, definitely. And so to actually be asked, I mean, I was so incredibly lucky to be introduced to Dark Horse by Dave Gibbons, the artist on Watchmen, and then thankfully I was introduced to Chuck by Mike Richardson and Randy Stradley, and it was just so much fun to actually get involved in that sort of environment when I was just new in the business. I'd only been working for about 5 years within that particular, in comics. So I was actually learning on my feet and actually dealing with Chuck and his script just made my life so much easier. So before that, I was like doing lots of different things, and comics became my first love because of the sort of stuff I was doing for Dark Horse with Chuck and Watchmen and Killing Joke and that sort of stuff. So those sorts of things were starting to form me. To actually have them at the very beginning of my career, I mean, where else can I go up or down? No, up and up and up and up. I'm sure I have.
Was it intimidating at all, the idea of sort of taking one of your favourite films and then sort of picking up where they left off and carrying on almost Rob Bottin's work in your own art?
I think the lovely thing for me was like one, as I said, I'm a huge fan of it, and the idea was like to be. I mean, when you're that young, so like 35 years ago, even I was young 35 years ago. And the idea of sort of like being involved with something you love so much, you have such confidence, you don't consider anything other than the fact that it's only going to get better. It's that confidence thing that's like, thank God young creative people have. And to have the sort of like the safe hands of Chuck and Randy Stradley, who is the editor, and obviously Mike Richardson, who puts it all together. It was just, I felt supported all the way down the line. And that wonderful, blind, sort of like confidence of young people, it was complete and utter bliss right from the very beginning. And I've never been disappointed looking back. I can still look at it and I rate it as some of my top work still, 35 years later. So never intimidated. The only thing that intimidated me, I was incredibly lucky to like talk to John Carpenter, so like, I was so blown away. I mean, it was almost speechless talking to like, one of my heroes, but like, Mike Richardson involved me and John Carpenter right from the very beginning. I don't know if Chuck spoke to John in those days, but I was just blown away to talk to one of my heroes.
What were those
Ask a
conversations with John
difficult
like?
question. Oh,
It was me probably sort of like saying, I worship you. I wish I could have your lines, but I was just,
Yeah.
we all wanted to well, maybe the thing not so much, but yeah, it was just, I was blown away just to have a conversation with such a creative person in those environments. And he was so giving, he was just so generous. Like he expected me and Chuck to do something worthwhile, and thankfully Chuck and I did something worthwhile.
Chuck, what are your memories of the first imagery you saw through from John? So you obviously sent your storyline to him. Do you have a memory of the fax machine sort of then sending the image to you and your reaction to it?
Yeah, I do. And of course, the fax machine absolutely could not do it justice. But and this is just one little part, and it's people might not even remember this frame, but it was when McCready is at the base and has burned everything, and the shadow comes in over him, and he's looking back over his shoulder, and you don't know what it is right away, but it's the seals landing around him. And it was John just nailed it because every one of John's frames was, I come from a background in screenwriting, of course, and they were like the storyboards. But, storyboards are cartoons, and John, of course, brings art to it. And it was, I just remember that seeing that one frame that one time. And John, I said this last time, you weren't here, didn't hear it, but I thought, oh, he's got it. Not that he's got it and I've given it to him, but he has that cinematic, vision. And I really felt, and I know John did too. We were predicating this work on a movie, so it had to be cinemesque, if not cinematic. It had to have that feeling, and John just knocked it out of the park.
Thank you.
I mean, John, you said you worked on Watchmen and The Killing Joke prior to The Thing. Is that correct?
Yep.
Those are some of the most cinematic comics out there. So you definitely had that language prepared when you went in to work on The Thing from Another World. But I'm going to ask you the difficult question. What's your favorite bit from The Thing? What's your favorite piece of art that you developed for this book?
The wonderful thing, is how Chuck actually created McCready's character, and took it beyond what we saw in the movie. And one of the things I really enjoyed was the scene where they're on the boat and they're testing the blood, or he's testing the blood, and it was just it was a great opportunity. I was trying to make it light and cheerful, the sunlight coming, is he safe? And we know as viewers of the movie, he's not safe. He doesn't know he's safe. When he tested his blood on the boat, it was just so, that one scene for me really worked in the whole thing. I think that was the very first issue, probably page 5, 6, or 7, and it was just so much fun. And the great thing is, what Chuck did, it's he threw you in right at the very beginning where it's you see the body lying on the snowscape. And there's a couple of things that artists love most. Is one, snowscapes, nightfall, and deserts. So you don't have to put a great deal of detail. Chuck set the whole thing up in that was just wonderful. And then he took you into the detail, and it was just wonderful. And the great thing was, because Chuck relaxed me into it and the reader into it. Once we got to the monsters, I had so much fun just creating the monsters, the creatures, and that's because of the way Chuck paced it. So it still stands up for me, and I still love every. I can look through it now and think I've learned so much because working with Chuck, working with Killing Joke, and the great artists, writers who work on those with me. I mean, I felt I was learning as I went along, and I certainly learned when I was working with Chuck because he's so visually minded. The thing is, there's so many writers that love prose and tell great stories, but for someone to actually be able to visualize for the artist to take further, I mean, that takes a real talent, and Chuck does have that.
So
You know,
how did you come up with the iterations of the creature, the thingness of your story between you? Did you have ideas, Chuck, and say, I imagine a bit of this and a bit of that, John, and you're like, I gotta. How did
oh,
you create that Rob Bottin style?
this is the perfect handoff to John, because in the script, I never once described what the thing looked like. I just said the thing bursts from, or the thing is revealed out of someone's cuff. John, I never said it's got the head of a praying mantis. It does this. John just had it, and he took the bit in his teeth, and every one of those iterations of the creature is all on John.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean,
True,
that
right? True.
back I was saying about Chuck's, he doesn't try and nail things down. Like, he gives you that freedom because of that collaboration. I felt that support, and it was just so much fun. And the great thing about dealing with the script that Chuck gave me was the fact that I could literally throw paint at the board and see where it landed, and then I would try and create something from it. And that's because Chuck didn't say I want an ear here and an eye there and everything else somewhere else. So that was a great thing about working with Chuck. So the collaboration thing. I know you guys work in teams, and that's the thing
Yeah.
I love about working in comics. Is you work in teams, and if you get a good editor, a great editor, and I think Randy Stradley did a really good editing job on what we were both trying
Yeah.
to do. And it was just so much fun to have that support, and obviously Mike Richardson, what they were doing, what they were trying to create at that particular time was just so much fun because what they did do is give us the the grounding, the template almost, create something interesting.
John, did you channel the kind of science of the film? Did you think, right, the thing has got this kind of DNA in it and this kind of DNA in it, so it can express this from this planet and this from this planet? Or did you just give yourself freedom to do whatever you wanted?
I think that because within my DNA, never mind the thing's DNA, within my DNA, we actually, because I grew up with the thing, and even the original thing, which obviously is just a man in a rubber suit, was grew up with monsters, and and then seeing the thing and Alien and not so much Blade Runner was the ways people are starting to interpret something different and something alien, and the great thing about being steeped in the history of great science, what were happening in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with those incredible visualizers like Rob Bottin and people like that who were starting to create things that I could not imagine. Then suddenly someone else imagines them, and I extrapolate from what that guy, wonderful, talented genius did. It's just the great thing about being in that that format of being creative and evil. Well, not evil, but something alien. And the great thing about something alien is someone cannot tell me that does not look like an alien. So
Well, there,
And do you see the John, when you mentioned that Chuck gave you the freedom to kind of throw everything against the canvas, that it kind of put me in mind of Jackson Pollock. But I'm curious, is the thing more of a Jackson Pollock creature or more of a Salvador Dali surrealist creature, in your opinion?
that's a really good mix, actually. It literally is a mix of the two. I love surrealism, and before when we were doing it, when Chuck and I were doing it, we had to create those the surrealistic monsters and things. Obviously now with digital, lots of things have changed. But in the early days, Chuck and I was like had the opportunity to like almost write the textbook to a certain extent. Thank God for Chuck writing the textbook, and I just followed it. But I mean, the great things like in those days, which did for me, which really was those great artists you talked about. I mean, the surrealists for me were the ones who like made nightmares and dreams some sort of visual reality.
There was a chance when we finished this that Universal was really trying to think, is this the sequel? And it didn't happen. But I can say it wasn't because of the quality of our work. It was all the deals that had to be made with everybody. So we had a shot. You never know, and the work was worthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Many
10
will
years.
see it as a continuation for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Thinking about the thing,
yeah.
the way the cult value of it has grown over the years, the movie in particular, obviously. I mean, to a certain extent, we've like rode on the wave of that's like acceptance of what great movies can be. It's like it starts off in cult, and the great thing about like what the field that we work in, science fiction. I mean, it's grown over the last 20, 30 years. But like certainly when we first started in the business, I mean, I felt part of a very small, appreciative audience, people who actually knew what we were talking about. And that's sort of like, because now, I mean, if we'd had Netflix 35 years ago, that definitely would have gone on to a sequel.
Oh,
Probably.
absolutely, yeah. And then I can't blame. Listen, I'll blame the studio for everything, and I will. But they're rolling the dice on 50 or 100. Not $100 million back then, but certainly 50 or 70 million bucks. And the other thing is we didn't really have a champion for the project at Universal. So to tell what the Universal is like. I had a 3-picture deal. I wrote 3 number one movies, and they fired me in my 3rd year. So, what I could have done, I guess, is washed more cars in the parking lot or something. So, but that's the way it is. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
John knows that's the business. So,
Yeah, sadly, but yeah.
Yeah. And
Well,
John,
speaking of from a business that's more artistic, John, what are some of your visual inspirations? Like in the background, I'm seeing something that's very Giga-esque behind your left shoulder.
Yep, these guys sort of like that's my character Razorjack, and so like, I mean, working with Chuck actually gave me the sense of like trying to do something for myself, and again, strangely enough, it turned into a monster, and these guys definitely are my monsters. Obviously, Judge Dredd is one of the guys,
Mm.
so like I've had the pleasure of working with throughout my whole career. I've been incredibly fortunate to work with some of the best writers, and not just like continues blowing smoke, but like Chuck is definitely up there with the best writers I've ever worked with. So, Alan Moore and so, John Wagner and people like that. It's like I can't believe how lucky I've been in my life. But my sort of like inspiration are the writers, the people I collaborate with. I mean, they sort of like give me the framework to try and create something that's like Geiger and it's like Salvador Dali and people like that. And it's like I always still look around at the competition. There's no way I'm ever going to retire. There's no way I'm ever going to stop doing nightmare creatures. And everything around, it's like, will inspire me. It's like, I opened, after I did the barbecue this morning, when I came out to clean everything up this morning, I opened up the lid of the barbecue holding area, and there's one of the biggest spiders I'd ever seen in my face, ever. And I thought, grab my face now. I know it's been done before, but you have so many of these ideas. What can we do with this? And if you look closely at a spider, he was a big mother. If you get that close, they are really, really weird. And the wonderful thing, I mean, as we know, it's like, Guy created stuff based on what he knew. It's like, for the death aspect, skulls and intestines and things like that. You still get the best inspiration for looking at nature.
well, John, you nailed it, and I do want to underscore that he never got not one sentence, not one noun, ever in the script said what the thing looked like. He always had it because he was connected to the whole. John, it was amazing. You knew when it was supposed to be big, when it was supposed to be small. I mean, it
John
was
is the thing.
yeah.
That's what.
It's fantastic. It's like you had a block of marble in front of you. Chuck handed John the tools, said, "Try using this," and you just chiseled away, and that's what was on the page. This gorgeous
Out
collaborative
came the
image.
thing.
Yeah.
That was exactly it. And, because the screenplay is the blueprint. And I always hate that because guys get on the Tonight Show and say, when I developed this character, and I think, you son of a bitch, I created you. I said what you were wearing. I said, what you said, what you did, even parenthetically what you thought. You didn't develop it. But in this case, it really was. I handed John a set of blueprints and said, go to the store and buy a hammer. It was great.
Did you have phone conversations at all? Did you sort of,
We did.
on a sort of high level, just conceptual level, talk through your kind of plans?
The great thing about our conversation was sort of like, what you're doing on the weekend, sort of. The great thing is sort of like, which bar are we going to? What do you enjoy drinking? So, like, can we have a barbecue in the future? I mean, the only problem is with like any conversation I had with any American in those days was like the 1 or 2 second delay from the transatlantic phone call,
Right.
Yeah.
which,
The good old
no,
days.
which is just incredible. The fact that I'm in my image, I hope you, am I moving around in your images?
You are?
No, you're
Yeah,
good.
well, you're looking good.
So am I still wearing a shirt? Because I was getting a bit hot a minute ago.
We got the 2 second delay is just going to cut you.
And John, the world wants to know, what has been your question for Chuck these last 35 years?
Well, this is a great thing about, so like the question I've been waiting to ask Chuck, because like the last time I spoke to anyone about it really was Ranley Stradley, which is the editor. And it's like, it was something it really has been in my mind for 35 years, about 6 months. And, now I missed last week, it's now 7 days, so give or take a decade or two, it's like, it really is something that I want to know, sort of thing. And Randy did tell me, so like, but I want to know if it's true. And one of the things, so like, we were trying to get sorted out in the early days, I was actually going to go down an avenue there. Was like I was going to pretend my real question was like, what's the meaning of life? But I thought, no, I'm not going to go down that avenue. I'll have to really, life. If you know the meaning of life, please tell us, Chuck. But no, the real
It's
question
42, isn't it?
the real question is like, I needed a plot point clarified in the first couple of weeks that I was working on it. And so I rang Randy, because he was like starting to like, not slow me down, but like I wanted to make sure I was getting exactly what Chuck wanted me to get onto the page, sort of thing. So I rang up Randy, and we was like talking, and I was like saying, I need to know just a couple of plot points about this particular aspect of this particular story. And can you ask Chuck? And he sort of like said, well, Chuck's been missing for a couple of weeks. I've not spoken to him for a couple of weeks. And I said, oh. I just carried on. And we put the phone down, finished the conversation. Then about like 3-4 weeks later, Randy rang me and said, I found out what happened to Chuck. He got his yacht. He sailed to the Philippines and watched the volcano explode. That's true. Please tell me that is true.
It's half true. I actually flew to the Philippines just as Mount Pinatubo was blowing up, and I got stuck in the Philippines for almost, I don't know, it was almost 17 days because the airport was shut, the power was out. It was crazy. Yeah. So I was stuck in the Philippines, and it was nuts. And in fact, in Manila, when the ash cloud came through, it was totally black.
Wow.
10 o'clock in the morning, as black as night, and the ash was falling out of the sky like snow, except when your headlights hit it, it wasn't the white Star Wars kind of thing. It was gray. I mean, it was absolutely a biblical catastrophe. And I was there researching another film, and I was like, okay, I've had enough of the Philippines. Let me go home. And that didn't happen. Well, that's a
You
good
know what's even
question, John.
crazier? What's even
That
crazier is I can believe that Chuck would get a yacht to go and witness a volcano. That seems like a very Chuck thing to do.
Well, that's exactly what I heard. It's like I when we spoke, it's like I knew Chuck's history, I knew that was exactly the sort of thing someone with history would. I don't wonder about the truth anymore. I am still going to talk about the myth. Chuck.
Well,
Well, speaking about myth,
Sure.
Chuck and John, we have something from one of the viewers right now. They are saying from Nick Nichols, are either John and Chuck familiar with the John Carpenter interview where he was asked what he would do for a sequel film? And John Carpenter answered, I would simply film the graphic novel.
No kidding. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that, John. Did you?
Someone actually did tell me, a friend, so like he was a huge fan, sort of like Rob, so like he follows my career very, very well, and he's a huge fan of science fiction, and it's like he did hear just a couple of months ago that that's what John Carpenter did say. So I was very touched by that, and I think yes, I mean it would have been. I mean, plus the fact whatever's like the storyboarding would have been, the idea was like interpreting someone like Rob Botan interpreting my creatures would have been I would have died happy basically.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
very much.
Nick, thanks. I didn't hear that, but I did. So I did not go to Comic-Con that year, and Harlan Ellison apparently got up and talked about our work, John.
Oh
And
wow.
and because my agent called me up and said, "You're not going to believe it. Harlan Ellison just got up here and said this was a watershed moment for graphic novels."
Oh, wow.
And I was thought, hello, hey, you got Chuck. You're the wrong number here. You can't be talking about us. But John, you made a huge impression. Well, you know what? You've worked nonstop. You were working nonstop before then, but you've worked nonstop after. And, it's been a legacy kind of project for us. And I just also want to say 90% of the time in Hollywood, you're not going to say, I had a good time making this. You're not even going to say, I like the people I was working with. But, John, it was a total pleasure. We talk, maybe two or three times a month, and we spend half the time just going, "What are you doing? What's going on? What's on the barbecue?" So I made a friend, and still a friend 30 years later.
But why not another collaboration? Why not? I mean, it doesn't have to be the thing. Why not another journey together to tell another story?
I'm happy.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually always going to put Chuck in a position where, if it's recorded on the internet, it's like I definitely would work with Chuck now. I will.
Finding.
We
Well,
just got to. We started doing too many things, and thankfully, because of the collaboration with Chuck, I was like directed off into some different directions, which I've loved. But the idea was like we didn't do Virus, which was the next thing
yeah.
that you did, of course, wasn't it?
And
So we did.
I was disappointed that I didn't get John. But it was John was busy. I kept asking, and then I kept saying, "Well, let's wait for John." But he had a couple of projects stacked up. But
Yeah, you know what it's like being a freelance. I mean, I
oh,
think all you freelancers as well. You have to keep planning for the next year or the next
Oh
6 months,
yeah.
or weeks. So I actually had things lined up. If I'd have realised like Chuck was going on, another project sort of thing, I definitely would have jumped on that. But to work with Chuck now would be just a sheer joy sort of thing. I mean, we feel like sort of like a hand in a glove sort of thing for me. I mean,
oh,
because it was so comfortable and just catching up with Chuck now after all these years. I mean, I feel like we are friends and that's never going to change sort of thing. I want to go down the bar, pub and like, have beers with other so like Chuck's going to be buying because he's the most successful of us.
well, I tell you what, John, I am going to send you a script today.
Whoa.
Okay, I'm going to send you a script today.
The
And in fact, I
exclusive,
think I'm going to
folks.
send you two.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, so let's pick one of those, and then we'll call Mike.
Well, brilliant.
What we'll call whoever. Let's see.
100%, definitely, yeah. Thanks, Ian, for sort of being my
All right.
age.
Yeah, when the big screen version happens, I'll be awaiting my residual check.
That's
Yeah.
it. Those big.
$0.02. You know,
Finder's fee.
find
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, don't cash those WGA checks because they're not very big.
No, more power to you guys. Let me ask about the thing again. What question to both of you, one at a time. But what are your favourite sequences in terms of transformation? If I said, what's the best transformation of the creature in the thing? What springs to mind, John?
For me, I mean, actually, is one of my top three favorite quotes, and I think I told Josh this a couple of weeks ago, and it's sort of like you got to be fucking kidding. It's when it falls up onto the floor and then sprouts those spider legs and then sputters off. That for me was just mind blowing. And the great thing about what John Carpenter did was the fact that not only did this wonderful horror, but he also did funny.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
hit it.
Although you
No,
have to imagine at that point, Palmer, this is how deep I'm going these days, is already the thing. So that's the thing being funny about another thing.
To this day, it's I don't like crabs because when the legs came out of that thing and it started scurrying, first of all, you can hear its toenails on the
Yeah,
floor. But I think one of my favorite transformations was Wilford Brimley saying, "Hey, I'm okay now.
Oh, yeah.
You can let me out."
Him.
I was like, "Get the flamethrower, man! You are not coming out." And Wilford is a total character, man.
Yeah.
He is something.
And
But what I love
John,
about like the movie and also the scripts like that Chuck gave was the fact that the characterization of Charles and McCready. It's like you like those guys.
Yeah.
There was an edge to them, and you knew they'd be a pain in the ass in so many different ways because they were very strong characters, but that they were human, and that was a great thing about all the characters in the movie, and the script was carrying on for those characters. Just loved that characterization.
They don't really like each other. They are constantly pinging
That was
off each other. Yeah.
and John, I didn't realize until today that you were the cover artist for Climate of Fear as well. How did that experience differ from the first, 2-issue series?
I think for me, when I was doing this project, I mean, it really was a dream come true. And Ian did mention what my background was, and the idea of growing up with the thing, or a couple of years previously the thing, and to have that pleasure working on it. I was just so much. I was living a dream. It was hard work. I mean, it's like Chuck and I, worked hard to create what we tried to create. But I was living a dream, and it's like I was asked to give a talk to a Cub Scout group, and because the Cub master was a friend, and he knew I did comics for a living. Unfortunately, in Britain, a lot of comics were funny kids comics, the Beaver, Dandy, and things like that. But I was so proud of the covers and the interiors, but
oh
many
no.
covers being heads. So I went to 6-year-olds and show them some of the work I'd done that actually, yeah. And it was spikes with eyeballs and exploding heads. The kids loved it. The grown-ups were really horrified, but the kids just loved it.
Of course
So
they did. Yeah.
I think
Best scout trip ever, I imagine, for some of the kids.
yeah, well, the parents were a bit worried, but as I say, the kids just loved it.
And that front cover of, I think, the first issue of the guy with the snow helmet or the helicopter helmet with the thing bursting out of it. Can you remember the impetus behind that design?
I think it
Was
really
it
was the
Terminator
script.
2?
Yeah, I think the great thing is because I was given so much freedom with the scripts, because Chuck used those certain key words, It's like, so it did come from the script and the idea was like, I think you mentioned spikes. You certainly mentioned blood a lot. You certainly mentioned viscera. So just mixing them all together. And so like my background was sort of like I was a medical artist before I
Oh,
became a professional
that makes
illustrator.
sense.
I'd seen the inside of bodies and operations, living bodies, dead bodies. And the incredible thing about the interior of a human body is how, when you shine lights on it, is how many spotlights you get, how many little flicks of light, how beautiful it looks. It actually smells funny, but it looks beautiful. And that's the sort of like stuff I was trying to get with those wonderful highlights that I had the opportunity to do with because of the description of the blood that like Chuck was giving me.
Well, you just nailed it, and it was that the importance of that cover because with something like a graphic novel, they do judge the book by the cover. I mean,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that's it. So this was the hook. And so I can remember when I got the first copy and I'm looking at it, I look at the cover and I'm blown away and I open the pages and the first thing I think is, okay, where is that frame in the book? And I knew it was the first SEAL who gets infected. That was what happened to him, just as they were about to get on the other helicopter. So, you know,
I just Spence and that drama. So like, I love the fact that like, you do not turn round. No one's going to save you if you're the last guy or if you're wearing a red shirt in Star Trek.
yeah,
That's about Chuck. He's like he knew exactly how to rip someone's heart out visually. In the fact that that would happen is just so. I love the fear. That's the thing that I love about the thing generally. Anyway, is that fear of you don't know who it is, who you can trust, and that's the joy of the thing and the script that Chuck gave me, and the fact that he actually carried that theme all the way through is just so satisfying.
And
Right. And
ironically, the
Chuck,
pair of you trusted each other implicitly, and you made a
oh,
masterpiece.
yeah.
ironically, yeah. And
And
Chuck, this is a question from Mike Richardson when you guys reach out with your new pitch today. But Michael Murnchak, I hope I'm saying that name right, in the comments ask, has there been thought of a reprint? Because I agree, all the copies out there are like, are $100 plus. So,
Uh,
I mean, I guess that's a dark horse question, but what would you guys like to see out of a reprint?
well, hey, Mike, you should do it. You'll sell more. Always kind of I hate to see that the prices get so strangled. No one should pay $100 for a graphic novel. And I want
nah,
to tell you that none of that comes back to John and I. It just we're not the profiteers here. But you know what? If maybe I'll just give Mike a call and say, hey, look, we just did this thing, and people want more of the thing, and you know,
They're going for over $100 a
Yeah.
piece, so your work
Yeah. And you
has.
guys can do a special introduction and forward. That would
we
be
should
great.
come out with our own discount version.
The bootleg.
The bootleg, the bootleg. John and Chuck, the bootleg say, there they are.
still,
Oh,
There you go.
John,
That's $200 just sitting there. I know
Yeah.
they're covers, aren't they? So that's more than
You're
that.
rich.
So,
well,
guys,
I,
sorry, John.
I've been very, very fortunate with the projects I've worked on, and I'm invited to conventions all around the world. And everywhere I go, people, one of the aficionados, the people who appreciate good comics and my career as well, they still bring me pristine copies of the thing. And I was in Lima just a couple of months ago,
no
and
kidding.
came with two, the first two things from another world, and I'm just blown away. One is the fact that like I'm invited to all these wonderful places, but two, the fact that people in these wonderful places have, my original comics, and it's just brilliant. I hope we didn't pay $100 a book, one book.
These comics that are older than Josh Weiss over here, they were
That
printed
is true. Yeah, I
before he
think
was born.
when was this? 92? 90, right? 92, right?
It's somewhere around there.
So I'm 94. So the comic is older than me.
Oh,
So
Yeah, let's not go there.
John, we're old.
So,
I
guys, if
think
I
it's,
gave you like a magic wand, and you've obviously done the thing, and you've done a marvelous job with carrying on the legacy of the thing. Is there another franchise or another film you would love to have done a comic book sequel to? Is there a particular part of the world you think is neglected? Doesn't even have to be science fiction. But is there something you have a passion for that you would love to have done?
um, I think the great thing about science fiction is when things are rediscovered. I mean, it's like, the invasion of the body snatchers and things like that. I mean, that was remade in the 90s with Don Sutherland, I think.
Mhm.
So it was
And
78 with
70s,
Donald
yeah.
Sutherland, and then it was an Abel
Yeah.
Ferrara one in the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah,
yeah,
called Body
and
Snatchers or something.
Netflix
Right.
now is picking up on these really strange, obscure science fiction um, genre. So and coming up with something new and interesting. So I've been really excited. I mean, science fiction is in my blood. That's what I love. So I love horror. I love science fiction. That's what keeps me going. That's what gets me up every day to carry on drawing exploding heads and spikes out of. Thing is, God forbid I should ever see it in real life. But I mean, I don't mind depicting it. But that's a great question, actually. I mean, I think for me, it's like what Chuck is going to write next is exactly the thing that
You
Chuck,
know,
is there a film you'd love to have carried on?
well,
he's like, I think, yeah, definitely. If Chuck wants to do Blade Runner, I know they've done Blade Runner subsequently, but my top three is Terminator, Blade Runner, Alien. Actually, top five. You keep
Yeah.
going on Clock Orange and so on and so forth. There's never a top 10, but definitely the top three is Alien, Blade Runner, and The Thing. And it's like, the, thankfully, the weird thing is, all these great science fiction movies tend to be not successes at the time, and then thankfully for people like us, the aficionados who actually never go away and rediscover them when you're in your 20s. You weren't around when they first came out, but you can see the quality that came out, the imagination of these great creators. So it's great that science fiction never goes away, and the best science fiction never dates.
True.
Blade Runner never dates. It talks about AI, and we're now scared of AI. I mean, Terminator, to a certain extent, has done the same thing. So I want.
John, here I was hoping that you'd say you wanted some kind of weird amalgamation of Dirty Dancing and The Thing, like a sequel to Dirty Dancing where the Thing appears.
You'll take me to an avenue I don't want to explore, but
What about you, Chuck?
you know, I agree with John on his top three. Absolutely, we overlap there. Because it's funny. It's the craft and it influences the artist in my case. By the time something comes out and goes to the movies, everyone has totally forgotten about the screenwriter. Everyone has absolutely no idea that, 3 years before that movie came out, somebody put a blank piece of paper or opened a window in their computer and there was nothing but white. And the whole struggle, I just came to love the struggle, creating something completely new and then knowing that the studio was eventually going to fire me off the project, right? And I just, it took me only a couple of years in Hollywood to know that, good job, kid. Now go away. Bruce Willis has now made up all these lines in the makeup trailer, and who the hell are you, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's a director's medium and everything else. Like your screenplay was only the blueprint. So let's pretend it's the Golden Gate Bridge for just a fucking second. And I designed the bridge, but the guy who painted it and brought the bricks, he's the artiste, right? Is that it? So, for me, I almost want to do the next thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to have John do that with me. We'll find the next thing. And
that's a I mean, I actually think that's the blank page thing. This is the scary sensibilities of creativity. the idea of like trying to put something on paper that's like lives up to what you dream, I'm always disappointed. I always want to get it better, and I've never sort of like been allowing for the thing as something I can look at. When I first finished it, I thought I could have done that so much better. I could have done that so much better. Now, it's like 30 years later, I think that's as good as I could do at that time, and it's the best. It still stands up to the best I've ever done. But you know, the blank page, the idea of like my dream is going to be put on that blank page. It's just such a buzz. I'll never lose the buzz, I hope.
Yeah,
Well,
it really is that. And John, I agree with you. You know, it's 3 decades later, I'm a much better writer than I was back then. But does it hold up? You know, it is what it is. You know, it's not an Oscar-winning thing. It's designed to make you flip those pages and say, "I want volume 2." You know, I want volume 3. I want to see what happens. That's all we can do.
Comic book that's going for $100 a pop, so it holds up.
and just speaking of the writing, Chuck, the way you describe Antarctica in the 2 issues is really sort of super vivid, and just like I'm curious, have either of you guys ever been to the continent before?
No, but I used to be a high altitude mountaineer back in the days. You know, so I guess it was Antarctica going like this, right?
You've
I
been
used
cold
to
in your time, Chuck. You
a
know,
little cold.
I
Amazing.
remember sort of like I wasn't quite as exciting as Chuck's history in the army, but I was in the army when I was very young, and we did a walk across the Brecon Beacons, which is a mountain range in Wales in the UK, and it was snowing, and it really was white out, and it was, you know, knee deep in snow. And the idea was like me, 16, 17 years old, walking through this white wasteland. I didn't know if I was going to survive. So the idea was like, you know, what Chuck wrote, and it's like the sensibility, what we could try and get on paper. I mean, I probably inferred that somehow and put it down. And again, as I said, so like the idea of doing a blank white paper wash saves so much time.
But you made it part of the. It's one of the characters in the movie.
Yeah,
Antarctica is one of the characters.
yeah, very much so. It's that paranoia, it's like, you know, being no one's going to save you, even probably you're just going to be stranded.
Right, and that great sort of nature like the sea, it doesn't care if you live or die. It just, you know,
I mean, if the thing had come out in the last 5 years, we would have read it as a metaphor for climate change. We would have said it's nature fighting back. It's an expression of nature's anger against mankind. You know, it has that wonderful quality. We spoke about this the other day, didn't we, Chuck? About you can read into it so much because it's almost as a blank canvas, you know, of a metaphor. You know, what is the thing? Well, it's paranoia, it's illness, it's you know, paranoia about authority. It comes probably from John Carpenter. All these things. And, you know, we had a pandemic 5 years ago, and on the TV we were watching things going, you know, it's mutated. The strain has mutated into something else, and I'm going, this is the thing. You know,
Right.
it's now happening on my.
Yeah, all of us were going. You got to be fucking kidding.
but you guys brought that up last time, absolutely. And you know, back then it was the Cold War, it was anti-authoritarianism, it was, you know, but you know, and I'm not saying this is great art. I'm not. It is a craft. But you hold a mirror up, right? And people will see in it, you know, exactly what they bring to the theater is what they're going to see. But that to me is, you know, that's part of the craft. That is really this wonderful thing that people project on it. Like you talked about Dolly and what people project on Dolly, what they
Yeah.
projected on John's art. And he's saying, well, it's just a little bit of wash. It was easy for me. You try to paint a snowdrift with, I'll give you a piece of white paper. You give me a convincing snowdrift, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of John's art and Chuck's writing, we have a message from a viewer at the moment. Kane the Barbarian says, "Thank you so much for these wonderful comics that continue the story of The Thing. With respect and love from Minsk, Belarus."
Ah, thank you. Thank
so
you.
much.
That's
Let
really
me ask
And
the question
so
to you both. I just want to ask about, cinematic. Chuck, you're a screenwriter also by trade. John, you love and watch movies. As you create the comic books, in a sense, do you see it moving in your head? Do you see the movie version, that you're creating on page?
yeah, I certainly do. I mean, and particularly obviously going back to the way Chuck wrote the script. I mean, he knew when to do a close up. He knew when to describe what the characters were doing, but he didn't over describe it. So to me, to interpret something that was just so comfortable. I mean, it's this cinema thing going around in my brain, sort of thing. I decide if I'm going to do a close up long shot if it's not directed in the script, and it's like I can see them moving from one great scene to the other. And I just love my mind sometimes.
Well, I loved it too, John. It was, you know, I was I saw this as a movie in my head,
Yeah.
and John might work this way too. I used to have a couch in my office, and I would go if I'm trying to beat on a scene, I'd go lay down on the couch for 15 minutes and just try to think it out. And writing a screenplay, you're writing a film, and in working with John, I saw every one of those panels as like a freeze frame from the movie. But what was so gratifying is to work with John and his artist's eye, describe one of those frames slash panels, and every one of them was composed. Every one of them, had something in the foreground, something in the background. There was a wonderful one in there where McCready is cutting his finger to see if he's contaminated, and his face is reflected in the blade of the scalpel that he's cutting his fingers in. So if you're working with a guy like that, I mean, you're going to come off looking pretty good here, I think.
Thank you.
John, did you, to the best of your recollection, how much research was involved? Because in the second issue, you're going all these different places. You're on a submarine at the end. I mean, how hard was it to come up with these locations, to draw these locations?
I think the weird thing is sort of like it. If I've been researching nowadays, everything would be. I could Google it. I could sort of like go onto the internet. It would slow me down by weeks. It really drives me mad trying to look for a real reference now. Whereas in those days, like I might have seen Hunt for Red October and I knew how close it would be. So I pinched all those things that I could remember and twisted them around in my mind and put them down on the paper. So thankfully, except for, and one of the frustrating things was trying to get portraits of of Childs and McCready. I found about two or three of them, and that was so frustrating because I like doing portraits. I like getting the people believable. So other than, trying to get the characters and the photo reference for them, most of it was just sort of like, I might have flicked through books of obviously Antarctic and the, um, anything that's like might give me some inspiration. So, but thankfully, it's not as much reference now that I would just never stop looking for reference now. I'd do the nothing. No, I wouldn't. I'm not
Yeah.
stupid.
And
That,
and
that's
were
the
you
best.
encouraged to keep it, like, to not be super one to one with Kurt Russell and Keith David, or else they would have to pay them for the likeness?
I never knew. How did,
I'm wondering. I'm
Yeah, I
curious.
didn't either.
Yeah, I feel like, because when they make toys and stuff, if it's really close to the actor's likeness, then they have to get paid. But if it's like different enough, they don't. I think that's how it works.
actually, I do remember I did some Terminator covers for Dark Horse around the time I did the thing, and we couldn't use the likeness of the actors in Terminator, so it started impinging then. So like, I think it's got a lot worse in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
But certainly when we were doing, I don't know, I'm assuming they dealt with the studios to a certain extent. We had an opportunity to be a bit, we could use likenesses up to a point, I suppose. So,
This was nobody could get a screen grab back then.
Yeah.
no,
You had to
Because you
go
paused the VHS and it had that wavy line when the pause.
and you take a Polaroid of the television screen. Yeah.
And it would always be terrible because you couldn't get the lighting right. It would just be this big white flash, and you're like, oh, rats. Or you had the disposable camera if you were me, and you tried to take pictures of the screen back in the day. You have to wait to either use the whole roll up and send it off to be developed, or waste an entire camera.
It's so funny how we're talking about the technology has changed for the better, and I agree with John. I go down research rabbit holes too, and I'm like, you got a job. It's not all about doing this, but the most important part of what we do hasn't changed at all. There's all these bells and whistles and stuff, but it still comes down to two guys working it out between each other. And I'm also one of those guys. In the SEALs, it is very collegial, right? There is not a lot of military bullshit. If you're there, you've got a voice, and we work together. And who's ever got the best idea, the most viable idea, that's the way we're going to go. And John and I were just like that too. There was no ego. I don't even want to say there was any give or take. It was like, that's a great idea. Let's go. That's good. That is the best idea. Let's roll with it.
Definitely.
Best
And
way
is
to
there
work.
anything you guys would do differently if making this comic today, or you do it exactly the same?
Wow. That's a good question.
Because a lot of books that I've been involved in have been reprinted and digitalized, because when Chuck was doing, or I were doing this all those years ago, there was no such thing as digital scanning and things. So when they reprint whatever is being done now, I'm assuming it will be from the original plates, printing plates. But I've been involved with like some digitalization of The Watchmen and Killing Joke. And we were given the opportunity to tweak things. And like the artists, Brian Bolland on Killing Joke and Dave Gibbons on Watchmen, decided they weren't going to do any tweaking, because where do you stop?
Yeah, you
Once you
just redo the whole thing.
it's like when they started digitalizing Star Wars in the 1, 2, and 3 or whatever, and then they suddenly found hang on, it actually looks so false.
Yeah.
The enthusiasm I had, and Chuck and I had, was someone who was 30 years younger then. We might be more experienced now. We might have grown as creators and artists and writers. But what we had then was that enthusiasm
Yeah.
and the excitement to create something that I'd certainly never seen before. I'd never depicted creatures like that before, because I got the opportunity through Dark Horse and Chuck to actually create something. So what the monsters I do now are based on the monsters I did for the Thing. So no, I wouldn't go back. Definitely not.
Yeah, I'm having one of my novels is being translated into Spanish, and I wanted to change some things, and John just hit it right on the head. So I got in there and I just wanted to tinker with one scene, and the whole thing started falling apart. And and I just said, forget it. I didn't think it was that tightly written and wonderful, but you start pulling a thread out,
Yeah.
and
The whole sweater
thing falls.
falls apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't worth me making it better. That I was only making it worse.
Cool. Well, I think we're drawing to a close here, guys, aren't we? It's been another wonderful chat. Chuck, it's great to see you again. This time next week, we'll go again.
Yeah. Part 3.
And John, fantastic to hear you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to catch up with you and actually be able to relate to the guys and hearing the conversation. I really felt so much part of it. Thank you so much. I felt like I was one of the guys in the platoon, and the sergeant says, "Don't leave them behind." Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Of
Well,
course. Yes,
John,
thank you.
I'm gonna find those scripts, and I'll email you. But guys,
Definitely.
thank you so much for inviting John and I on here, reuniting us, and every bit of luck. Break every bone in your body on this documentary. You're doing the Lord's work, and we're delighted. Thanks, guys. It's been an honor to
Cheers, guys.
Thank you so
It's been
much,
on.
guys. Really, thank you.